90 something percent of testosterone deficiency is this term of secondary hypogonadism, but just meaning, it's not a problem with the testes making the testosterone. It's the brain telling the testes to make the testosterone. That signal isn't there because there's something getting in the way. If I have chronic conditions, so heart disease, kidney disease, diabetes, all those conditions will add on top of each other and will push my levels down.
Sleep apnea is directly linked to low testosterone. Maybe explain that for just a second.
If you're waking up multiple times, or maybe you don't feel like you're waking up, but your brain does overnight, multiple times per hour, you're never getting that good deep sleep where your body's really recovering. We start to get stressed, we start to get sleep deprived, maybe our diet's off, or maybe even we're doing long periods of fasting for our health for some reason. Those are periods of stress, and that'll hurt our hormone levels. The hormone levels are an energy cost to the body, and when stress levels go up, our body's trying to put energy in other places.
Okay, before we jump in, quick health check. Are you subscribed yet? You'd be surprised how many people forget the one click that actually helps them feel better every week. Go ahead, hit it. Around here, we turn science into self-care you can actually use. Let's get started. Every week on Whole Plus, we talk about different ideas, different topics, really trying to push health forward and really trying to embrace this holistic approach or the holistic model where we think about the whole body, all the different things involved. And one of the areas that often gets neglected is men's health. I think that there has been so much attention on women's health, and rightly so, honestly. I think we need the research, we need the clinical experience, we need all the things. But men's health needs a reframe too, just like pediatrics, just like so many other aspects of health that honestly are outdated the way they are conventionally practiced. That's why I brought in my next guest. So, this is somebody close to me, near and dear to my heart, who actually works in our clinics at Whole Plus. And ironically, a lot of the men have been signing up to see him. So, please join me in welcoming Dr. Brandon Smith to the show. I'm going to let Brandon tell you a little bit about himself ultimately as we go through the show. But we're going to jump right in, Brandon, with the first question. And I'm sorry, I have to call you Brandon because we know each other, but he is a doctor. He's a conventionally trained MD. He is excellent. Our patients love him. But we're going to jump right into to my very first question, which is, what are we missing when it comes to men's health?
So I think that's a really good question. The main thing that I think when guys come in for the first time into the office, the mentality seems to be, and if it's not broken, we don't have to fix it. And that's the once a year annual physical model. Doesn't mean that it couldn't be better. And I think that's my first visit with a guy is sitting down, figuring out how their lifestyle is, like ultimately trying to get a good baseline on them and figure out where are the areas that we could work on improving and where are they doing well to figure out how do we move the things, I guess really move the needle in the right direction. So we're seeing metrics actually that matter improve. So whether that's, on average, I think when I'm seeing guys, if things are running well, I'd like to see them about twice a year. So maybe a little bit more aggressive than that. Once a year, it's not broken, don't have to fix it all.
I think I saw a statistic recently that said that only like 30 to 40% of men even make the
The
annual
annual,
physical.
yeah.
So,
So
so
that's to me, that's the low bar. That's the
yeah.
thing that that's a population health level. How do we keep people in the country healthy? What is the minimum that we need there? And that's that 1 year annual physical. And that's the sad reality is most people don't even make that low bar.
Do you think that just got baked into our medical culture, so to speak, somehow, that there's this like comfort zone around like, okay, well, as long as I make that appointment, I'm fine. Do you hear men say that a lot?
Um, I feel like a lot of the times when I'm getting guys that are coming in just in our practice, it's someone that's coming in that's motivated or something has changed them to want to change something else. Whether someone else in their household is getting healthy, someone else in their family is coming into the practice, and I get to see the husband.
Yeah.
Someone is training for a new race or event that they want to really do well in. Something's really got them motivated. Maybe they have a parent that's gotten sick, and they're looking, into that crystal ball and seeing, what path, might I go toward? How can I change that path? So it's people coming in pretty motivated. I think in general that, we have in our clinic, which is it's nice working with patients.
Definitely, and I think we're sort of blessed in the sense of, like, we have motivated people, people that want to learn more. We also have the people that are sick, right? The super sick that are coming in and are trying to get answers. But again, when we turn the lens back on men, what are they saying to you in the exam room? Like, what are some of the things that they're coming to you with, or maybe even some of the frustrations of what might have kept them out of making that annual physical or even a baseline appointment? I mean, I had a patient recently who had not seen a doctor in like a decade. You know what I mean? And that happens a lot where men are coming in and they, work really hard and they put their head down and they grind away and they, have a family and then that gets foggy and there's a lot going on there. And then they look up and the years have gone by. I'm curious what they're saying to you in the exam room.
I think it probably like there's a few different clusters of patients that I feel like I would see, and it's probably easier to break them down
Yeah.
more by like the age range. So when I'm seeing, the 20, like late 20s, 30-year-old guy that's coming in, maybe thinking about starting to have a family, hey, I haven't been to the doctor in 10 years. The last doctor I saw may be a pediatrician or someone that I saw when I was sick. I don't think anything's wrong thinking about having a family. I just want to test hormone levels, see where my testosterone is. These are the types of questions I'm getting.
Oh, yeah.
Even in some of the younger guys, like, 18, 19, 20 around college, a lot of people are coming in, they've had their testosterone levels checked and they just are asking questions and said, hey, here's my number. What should we do about it?
Yeah.
Whether we actually need to do anything about that or not, on a clinical level, different story. And how to even interpret that number is, that pathway that I have with that patient. And then, like you mentioned, the person that is finally putting their head up after working, hit retirement age. Now I have all this free time. Now I feel like I've got time to get caught up on all the things I may have missed out, through that career journey. I mean, I talk about it with those people hitting retirement age. It's such a big life transition. It's fun working with them because it's almost like the reference I give them is like, remember when you went off to college? This is as big of a life transition
Yeah.
going from working to not working as it is when you left your house to go to college. You have to think about it like that.
I remember I had, I think this gentleman was in the financial services industry or in the sort of like, the investment banking world. And he's like, Dr. Taz, for 25 years, I walked into a room with 15 different computers and all of us like trading and competing against each other. And I'd go home after a 12-hour day and I would collapse after having a meal and a few glasses of wine and maybe a few vacations. He's like, 25 years have gone by doing that, and I'm looking up and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, there's sun and there's nature." I mean, like, literally being in a whirlwind, and I know even my own husband just describes this fog is what he talks about. But one of the things that I have noticed is that the first question, and I want you to set us straight on this, the first question, men of all ages, like you said, even the 18-year-olds, I mean, my daughter's 18 and her friends are talking about this, like, where where's my testosterone? What is an optimal level of testosterone? Apparently, I found this out recently that some of the guys in her grade, even as young as like 15 or 16, were getting testosterone from somewhere and injecting themselves until their parents found out. So, help everybody who's listening to their show, whether you're a parent of a teenager or you're a young man or you're a man sort of in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, help us understand testosterone. We know it's important. We know it drives so many different, really positive things. But what should we really be thinking about when it comes to testosterone?
Yeah. I mean, so first thing is, just the definition, it's a steroid hormone. It gets inside all of the cells across the whole body. And just trying to give it some context that it's, when we're looking at testosterone levels for the most part, unless you're doing maybe like saliva testing for the hormones, then you're talking about a blood level of testosterone. So we're just measuring what's in the blood. We're not talking about what's happening in the brain, what's happening in the muscles, what's happening in the prostate, what's happening in the scalp, all these different levels of detail that we can get down to. And so one is just, okay, what's the number? Two is trying to understand, what is that number changing throughout the day? I think if guys had a testosterone monitor the same way that we had a glucose monitor,
Wow.
people walked to see what their numbers would fluctuate with across the day. If I didn't sleep the night before, maybe my testosterone has crashed whenever I like woke up very early, came into my testosterone lab check that morning. I'm a pilot. Got off of an overnight shift flying back from Europe, and then I went in and did my labs that next day. So the first question I always have is about the context of those labs. What happened leading up to them? Where are they at? One, obviously just getting, like a physical exam on them. What's the body weight, body composition, all these other factors, and then figuring out what happened even on that one particular day to really decide what is that one number on that lab test from the testosterone out of the blood actually even mean for them.
How much can it vary in a given day? Like
Hundreds of
hundreds of points. Wow. So is there an optimal time to test testosterone, or is there a guideline that we should be giving men as to when the best time is to test it?
So as far as the guidelines go, you really need 2 low morning time testosterones to really confirm a diagnosis.
Mm,
So in general, when I'm talking with my patients and trying to look at testosterone, I'd like them to get it done before 10 a.m. Yeah, I guess maybe some exceptions if someone's working different circadian rhythm schedules, like a night shift worker or something like that. We might have to interpret it a little bit differently, but morning time, and then typically at least 2 numbers that we like to see to really establish that pattern. One
interest
number is a snapshot, 2 starts to tell a story.
So, and where do you like I know a lot of men ask me, like, "Where's my free testosterone?" Right? Where do you like total? Where do you like free? And what's the difference between the 2 numbers?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and sometimes when you're looking at the numbers, they don't always match up. Someone looks good on a total, and then their low is free, their free is low, and they're really trying to figure out what are the tools that we can do to help that. So the first thing I like to, I guess I miss being in academics teaching our
Yeah,
medical students, so my
yeah.
patients get to not suffer, but they get to learn with me. So I usually feel like patients come away pretty educated after our visits on what we're looking at, what we're looking for, and how I'm really interpreting their labs. So the total, so there's really two. I guess I'll back up even. There's 2 testosterone labs that we do. So one is the ELISA, that's the standard one that comes
Mhm.
back in a couple of days. Very quick for the most part. It's pretty accurate. It's what we used to do. And a lot of the older testosterone labs, when we compare, testosterone levels from the 70s to the newer testosterone averages and say, there's decline in testosterone, some of that is actually due to lab variability.
Hmm.
So we used to use the ELISA. So the other sex hormones, the estrogen, the DHEA, all might interact with that and typically make that number look a little bit higher. There are some supplements that can interact with it too. So just that first ELISA test, I don't put all my fish in that basket that's exactly what's happening to somebody. And that's actually measured. So the free testosterone is a calculation though. So I tell patients this isn't a real number. It's us trying to estimate and figure out how much testosterone is bioavailable, dissolved in the blood, where it can actually get into the cells and work. So most of that testosterone is bound to, for the most part, it's sex hormone binding globulin,
Yes.
and then the bioavailable is bound to albumin, and then actually the rest of it, a small percentage of it is just free dissolved in the blood.
So
So those are
should folks be looking at the total or the free or both?
so my first question is always around symptoms that they're having. Really just trying to match up what symptoms guys might be having to figure out, with their levels where they're at. You could have a guy with a testosterone level. And so when I'm looking at totals, mainly something north of 350 for a
Yeah.
total testosterone. Uh, Typically, guys really aren't having very many symptoms. It doesn't mean you can still have a low free testosterone with a low number and still get symptoms. But the first number I look at is that total, and then the free, and this is kind of how our bodies compensate. So, if I have a guy, one thing that happens is that protein that carries the testosterone, the sex hormone binding globulin, in overweight men, you'll see that number go up, or actually
Mhm.
it does the opposite. It decreases that in extra body weight. So now we're binding less testosterone. So even though a guy has a testosterone level 200, 300, they may feel fine. They still have a good free testosterone level, even with a lower total testosterone amount. So it's our body kind of compensating and adjusting. We have all these adjustment mechanisms and compensation, like for thyroid, the reverse T3, we can
Yeah.
block,
Yeah.
neutralize some of the hormone.
Yeah, so interesting with these hormones because many people just wanna fixate on and this is for men and women, by the way, like, they'll fixate on a particular number,
The number.
but it's really, like, all of these numbers play together in the sand, and understanding the whole hormone profile is just important for men, as it is for women.
If we do see lower levels, and I know we've talked about this kind of in the hallway, but if we do see lower levels of maybe a total and a free testosterone, is testosterone therapy always the first option?
The analogy that I like to give patients is, I know, I'm staring at my computer monitor right now, and we always have them in the patient rooms when we're walking and talking about this. Um, so, the analogy I give is, if your computer monitor is out and it stops working, or you've got low testosterone, I can go to the store and I can just buy a new computer monitor. I can give you testosterone and I can put your number where we want it. There's not really a question about getting it there. It's just a matter of, making that prescription and deciding to do that.
Yeah.
Some people will go that route. They find a testosterone clinic and, decide, okay, my system doesn't seem to be running. Let me just go get a new one.
Mm.
Now it's outside the body. I'm either doing injections or maybe cream. And now, that's my testosterone and I'm able to replace it really pretty quick and easily. That same afternoon, I could go get myself a testosterone injection if I wrote that script that day. I guess what I think we're uniquely positioned to do is really getting to see people. My history is mainly kind of talk me through your day. What does it look like when you wake up in the morning? When are you exercising? What's your diet like? How are you doing managing stress? What kind of coping mechanisms do you have there? How is your sleep? Sleep apnea is the number one reason where people have lower testosterone levels. That's kind of the most misdiagnosis for low testosterone.
I don't think we're going to say that again because I really don't think people realize that sleep apnea is directly linked to low testosterone. Maybe explain that for just a second because I feel like that gets missed all the time.
Yep. I mean, main thing is just it's sleep deprivation to the body. If you're waking up multiple times, or maybe you don't feel like you're waking up, but your brain does overnight, multiple times per hour. You're never getting that good deep sleep where your body's really recovering. So, when I tell people, hormones are almost always the first thing to go. When the body's in a good spot and it feels like reproduction is a priority, that's when our body is doing well making hormones. We start to get stressed, we start to get sleep deprived, maybe our diet's off, or maybe even we're doing long periods of fasting for our health for some reason. Those are periods of stress and that'll hurt our hormone levels. The hormone levels are an energy cost to the body. And when stress levels go up, our body's trying to put energy in other places.
I want to pause here because I see this pattern all the time. People are doing the research, they're listening to the podcast, they're trying to take better care of themselves, and they still feel so stuck, especially when it comes to their health, their hormones, their stress, and even taking care of their families. That's why I created The Circle. The Circle is my private membership where we go deeper into these topics with real guidance, demos, live sessions, and a supportive community. If you want to try it, there's a 1-month trial available right now. You can learn more at wholeplus.co/circle. That's HOLPLUS.co/circle, or just click the link in the description below and use the code YouTube. Now let's continue the conversation.
So many experts have talked about that over the years of just and it kinda goes back to sort of that Chinese medicine concept of qi or energy, right? Like, if the energy is not there, the first thing sacrificed in all systems of medicine is usually reproduction and reproductive hormones. That's the first thing kinda to go out the door. So, what would you tell men? Like, what is a comprehensive workup for shifting testosterone levels, which is now it's not just a conversation for, like, men over 40 anymore, right? We're seeing this younger and younger and younger. I mean, we're even seeing it in some of the teens and some of the men in their 20s. What's their starting point? Where would you have them start?
Yeah. I mean, so the first question is, looking for just a self assessment of, hey, do I think I'm having symptoms of low testosterone? If you are, I think that's obviously a good.
And what are some of the most common symptoms, just to educate everybody? Like, what is really low testosterone versus something else?
So the big ones that we're talking about, mostly that are more specific to testosterone, because so fatigue, is a list of a symptom, but it's can be caused by hundreds of other things too, as you know now. So it's not really a specific symptom, but if I'm seeing someone that's having decreased libido, they're having a difficult time with erections, they're going to the gym and they're working out, and their muscles are taking them days to recover after they've been in a good workout routine. instead of, it's not the first time they went to the gym, now they're in a routine, but it's still taking them days to really build back and recover. Changes in like hair growth,
Mhm.
were able to grow facial hair before and they can't, or maybe they're seeing a decrease of it on their legs. I mean, that could be circulation, but at the same time, it could be changes in hormones. So those are kind of the more specific ones that I'm looking for. So hair growth, libido, erections, muscle recovery, and then everything else, that people hear about, talk about, is really a little bit less specific to testosterone. And we need to kind of figure out what other things might I need to check if they're coming in with that type of complaint, like my energy's dipping. Yeah.
Right.
Pretty big workup to figure
Yeah.
out what exactly is the root for that.
And so, I know that we're looking at nutrients, we're looking at all the hormones, we're looking at inflammation and cellular function. One of the things I'm curious with, like, are you asking them to do like a home sleep study of some kind before you make a decision about testosterone?
I'm obviously asking about sleep habits. So the first thing I like to ask is it easy for you to fall asleep? Are you staying asleep through the night? Are you snoring heavily or has that changed recently? And then, it's great if they have a partner that can, give us that other piece of
We
information.
do.
It looks like they do look like they're choking in the light. It looks like they're stop breathing for, seconds on. I'm worried about them when I see them sleep or, they're sleeping in a recliner because, laying flat, they can't.
Yeah.
That person obviously, needs a sleep study before we decide to start giving them outside testosterone,
Yeah.
and see if we can't correct, the reason for it. But, there's so many triggers for this, and 90 something percent of testosterone deficiency is the term is secondary hypogonadism, but just
Mhm.
it's not the problem with the testes making the testosterone, it's the brain telling the testes to make the testosterone. That signal isn't there because there's something getting in the way.
Mm.
So whether it's an infection, if I had COVID, my testosterone levels are going to drop during that period. If I have, chronic conditions, so heart disease, kidney disease, diabetes, all those conditions will add on top of each other and will push my levels down. So having, any type of chronic condition reversed, if I'm talking about zinc deficiencies, probably a common one. We'll see that occasionally, and that's pretty easy to correct. But movement, not sleeping enough, stress levels just being really high, which I find stress is to be the particularly hardest one to manage.
It really is. I see so much high cortisol and low testosterone, and then you're constantly like, okay, I'm going to chase the cortisol, but I know this person needs some testosterone too. And kind of, again, that loop that I talk about, like that cortisol loop, getting stuck in there and trying to get somebody out of that. How do you handle that patient?
I mean, so stress, the hardest piece of it is because it's outside our body.
Mhm.
Our stress is coming from, yeah. I know you're my boss, but whether it's our
From
boss
me.
or
The stress
uh,
is from me. Yeah.
so whether it's coming from like a work environment or
Yeah.
a sick parent that they have to stay up and worry about or provide for, all these other things come at us, and at the end of the day, life happens and life is going to happen. So there'll be periods where numbers are up and numbers are down based off of what type of stress people are having, but figuring out when things get stressful, what tools do I have to kind of turn to? If we're talking about stress as one of the main roots, it might be as simple as adding in a herb like ashwagandha to kind of help
Good
it.
job.
It might be having them work on a meditation practice. I just find all the good stuff that we need. The exercise is like a stress relief tool. The meditation, all the things that could take 5 minutes to get a quick session in. Those are the things that we start to cut out when things get stressful.
Yeah. And they
Those are the things
add
that need the most.
they and even like little small practices I think improve over time. When it comes to actually replacing testosterone, do you like the shots? Do you like a cream? Do you like Clomid? What is your thought process there?
I think everyone has their own strategy on this one. I mean, it's very personalized and it's very customized, and I like to kind of give patients almost like this multiple choice question in the sense that we're working with them as a team. My options are, hey, I think this tool, and this tool are all good options for you. If you're scared of needles, I think shots are off the table. We
Mhm.
should start with something
Good
else.
point. Yeah.
Um, so it's just really customized in the sense, or maybe they have a kid and the cream isn't an option, or they're traveling so much that traveling with the cream and applying it every day isn't an option, but there's a stable dose that they could do once a week. So it really depends, but what I like to do personally in my practice is in clomiphene challenge
Mhm.
is what I like to give guys. So I look and I'll see, what their numbers are. So on the labs when I'm getting them, I'm looking at the LH and the FSH to really see, where the problem is. Is it the brain? Is it with the testes? And kind of making that diagnosis on that first set of labs, trying to figure out something in their lifestyle that we can work on modifying if, they haven't been exercising. Try to get them to get some type of high intensity exercise once a week. If it's, tackling the sleep, doing that for, at least a period of 2 to 3 months and really making that one lifestyle change a big priority. And if we can move that in the right direction and we test and we see your testosterone is responding, we'll just keep riding that wave in some cases and see, how high can we get your body to make your testosterone without adding any prescriptions in at this point.
I think that's
If
the super exciting part about what we do is that you can see those levels go up with just making those changes.
Yep. No, I mean, I've seen a guy, he had, I think, levels of around like 300, and all he did was get his sleep in a good spot. Now he's
Mm,
doubled up to 600. There's,
incredible.
it depends on how bad the problem is for how much, result you might get. So it's interesting to
Do
really
you
try to figure out
have, and not to put
which
you
part is work.
on the spot, but do you have a thought about testosterone pellets?
Um, uh, I don't personally, prescribe or implant any pellets. I just find that some people, I think that might work in the sense that if you put them in, the levels change, over like maybe they go out after 3 to 6 months. Um, I kind of like having, shorter term
Yeah.
dosing in the sense that we can really fine tune things. Technically, guys' hormone levels, they fluctuate over the 24-hour cycle instead of like the 28-day cycle like women. So we'll peak in the morning, it'll drop toward the afternoon. So the topical testosterone, putting it on the morning, letting it wash out or dissolve out of the blood, throughout the rest of the day. That's kind of the most physiologic, way to replace the testosterone. Putting it into the muscle, or, some guys do it subcutaneous and it trickling in slow, steady across the week. Their levels are up and they stay, pretty high. They're not really having a daily fluctuation for the most part. It's more like a weekly fluctuation if, they're appreciating even, a difference across the week. But I mean, my first part is trying to figure out, is there something that we could change in their lifestyle, to look and see what's going on, looking to see, a stress factor. Can they support that in any way? Their diet, for the most part, it's an obesity and body composition
Mm,
problem that we're seeing. So helping to build up muscle, decrease body fat, working on that body composition tends to favor higher testosterone levels. Working on improving or just prioritizing the sleep, even as just setting like a nighttime alarm on your phone. Instead of setting your bedtime, your morning
right.
time alarm to wake up, setting your bedtime alarm to go to sleep,
Yeah.
goes a long way to really make it consistent. The body just loves consistency. And I think, that's why we're on a circadian rhythm and, all these hormone cycles of, cortisol, melatonin for our daytime sleep, and, hunger hormones for when we want to eat. We're just always on this type of cycle. Our body's so smart.
It is so smart, but we do so much to it to throw it off very quickly. When we talk about muscle, and movement and its connection to testosterone, I know you have a big exercise background. I know that you're pretty passionate about this stuff. Tell the audience a little bit about you and how you really landed maybe first into integrative and holistic medicine, but then also the movement and the muscle health part and how that fits into the story.
Yep. So I grew up in Jackson, Tennessee, and I went to Rhodes College. I kind of already knew that I wanted to go into med school at that point, leaving high school. So I picked high school to decide, how can I get into med school? And that was where I landed, got into
Well,
biochemistry, and really liked the cellular pathways, mechanisms, and, understanding that piece. Um, it was an interesting overlap where I joined a club. It was a CrossFit club in my first year of college. And I was lucky that a doctor from my hometown, he actually came in. He was a family medicine doctor, but he had just started doing, or I guess had been doing CrossFit for a while. But Dr. Jeremy Draper, he
it was
had basically established a practice outside of his family medicine group where he was, I guess he was working as a family medicine physician, prescribing blood pressure medications, seeing people gain more weight, needing to prescribe more medications, and just medication managing. Then he took a weekend class as a CrossFit instructor and started to see people lose weight in the gym and making progress and coming off of blood pressure medications. And it made him question the reality of, why did I go through years of school and dedication and training to prescribe the medications when I could take a weekend class, understand about exercise, and help these people actually get
Yeah.
healthy.
Yeah. Huge
Uh,
difference.
so I got into CrossFit, started coaching eventually, and there were some really like interesting parallels. One of the things that they talk about is like a health wellness spectrum.
Hmm.
So the idea is, I guess I'm trying to see on my screen, if this is the low side, someone that's sick, and this side, someone that's pretty healthy. You start out healthy, over time, maybe you get high blood pressure. Maybe it goes on to develop, some high cholesterol and some extra body weight, and then eventually prediabetes. And then eventually, you catch a pneumonia,
Well,
get sick, and now you're
disease.
on this side of the spectrum. What can we do to actually push people higher up that side of the scale? The more healthy or the less chronic conditions someone has, if they get sick, the less far down it knocks them. It's a conceptual idea,
Yeah.
but it made a lot of sense. The more muscle I have on my body, thinking about saving for retirement is what I talk about with patients. It's like finding
Yeah.
gravity. If I do my
Yeah.
strength training, I can build up my bones, I can build up my muscle. If it's going to decline over age, I'm going to have to work hard to keep it from dropping so fast. So that's kind of idea, that's moving that person higher up that health spectrum. So when, they do fall, maybe get injured, they don't lose as much muscle, or if they lose the same amount of muscle, they're not to the point where, they're mobilized or can't get up and manage at home by themselves.
Do you think men today are good about building muscle and being conscious of that? And is there a guideline you could give them, like, you know, get in the gym X number of times a week for X amount of time? This is the right way to do it. I mean, you see guys in there, right, lifting super heavy weights. Some are in there not really lifting, walking around a whole lot. Some are in there lifting super heavy, and I feel like they're in there sometimes even twice a day. What is like a good realistic way for any guy, any age, to really begin to build muscle?
So I guess a couple of different goals with exercise. I think I kind of break down movement into a couple of different pieces. I guess this is just my framework with it.
Mhm.
But movement, mainly, I'm talking about how is someone moving throughout the day. The person that goes to the gym and they exercise in the morning, but then they sit down in their office, all day, 8 to 5. They finally get up, go home. Maybe they put their head up and eat some lunch at their desk. They're not really moving. They exercised, but they didn't really.
Right.
And then the other side I'll say is the person that's moving. Maybe it's a stay-at-home mom, taking care of the kids at home. Someone that's working in retail on their feet all day. That person's moving all day, but they're not making that time to actually exercise. So that exercise is that window of opportunity for, basically either working on cardiovascular health, getting their heart rate up, or building strength and muscle. So as far as, that's how I like to divide up that exercise piece, whether it's in the
That's a good
morning.
way to think about it. Yeah. Yeah.
So as far as building up muscle, what I like for people to do is, just as a simple guideline and framework is, if you can lift something heavy, that's the goal. Heavy is relative. If I
Mm.
can lift 5 pounds and it's challenging, that's enough to build muscle. If I can lift 5 million pounds, or I need 5 million pounds to lift, so be it. I'm not worried about the weight, the number, or what the exercise even really is, as long as I'm moving it safely, not getting hurt. And then when I say heavy, the challenge is something 10 reps or less. So if I can do something in that range that's a challenge, it's not doing the 20, 30 sets of the light weight, and then sticking with that weight for 10 years. Eventually my muscle's going to be strong enough to
Right.
accomplish. I have to get heavier weight.
You just gradually work your way. And is it a couple times a week, you think? Or how often should they be in there?
Kind of the minimum dose that I like to see people get. I always talk about things in doses and prescriptions,
Mhm.
supplements,
Yeah.
exercise, prescriptions. I think that's important to really define for people. So yeah, 2 30-minute sessions a week is where I like to get people at a minimum. So, this is the person that's starting on GLP-1. If we're talking about really trying to protect their muscle, my minimum bar is I want you to get at least 2 30-minute sessions a week. If it's doing 30 minutes upper body, 30 minutes lower body to really focus on it, or maybe, 30 minutes full body and 30 minutes full body. That's kind of my minimum goal for being able to maintain some muscle.
I mean, I feel like I could talk to you about so many different topics for forever, and I know we're coming close to time, but I can you kinda connect, and we probably need to do a whole another session on GLP-1 and peptides and men's health and that stuff, but can you sorta connect the starting of a GLP-1 with muscle and with sorta just general testosterone, men's health, what your observation and philosophy is?
It's a catch-22,
I know,
and you
I
know
know. That's
this.
why I asked the
You know it.
question, so
I know.
I know, so
So it's, the person that's overweight, wants to be in exercise, maybe not seeing the progress that they want on the body weight or the body composition and coming in with low testosterone levels. The exercise is the thing that will, hopefully help improve their body composition, but and also raise their testosterone. So, that's the non-negotiable. Whether it's at a point where, they look, I've been doing this for 2 years and I'm not seeing any results. I'm at the end of my rope and I, don't think I can keep holding on to this. We have to do something. We need to change it. That person, talk with them and kind of figure out if it's appropriate, prescribing them GLP-1
well,
or
yeah.
even testosterone. Yep. I usually like to go one step at a time. Yeah, you
Yeah,
know me, I like to try to make it manageable and kind of bite size,
yeah.
steps and things to keep us on track when there's so much stuff to look at and in our space of whether it's labs or their whole history, at the end of the appointment, trying to narrow down to one or two big changes that I think is going to push them in the right direction. I kind of offer it up as, do you think, testosterone seems to be more of a problem, or do you think it's, is it your body weight that you think is holding you back the most? If they're having knee pain and, I've got a reason to push them in a direction or the other, their body weight's causing their knees to ache after they get done working out. And if I can get their body weight down, they'll be able to move better and that'll help their testosterone. I might be biased to say, yeah, I think maybe GLP-1 first might be the right option
Interesting.
or, my libido, my relationship with my wife, is super bumming me out and I don't feel motivated to do anything. Exercise is really hard for me, but my joints feel fine. That person might want to start with testosterone. Both things I think are going to improve their body composition, their insulin resistance, move the needle in the direction that we want to go, one step at a time, but usually just picking one or the other. So, I think both help, but trying to figure out, just
What to
one-on-one,
do first.
each one is the right
Yeah.
option for them.
You it brings us back to kinda where we started, where I think men need a whole body, a holistic approach, right? Because there is so much out there. There's so many options, and what I see a lot of men doing, just when I'm eavesdropping or even if they're coming into our clinic, it's like, they'll ride a trend and then they'll go order all this stuff and they'll do all this, do all these
For
things,
a couple of months.
but it might not be, like, the right thing for them in terms of what their actual starting point is, and I think the only way to get this right is to have a partner who can kinda be your sounding board, like, even if you took all our medical knowledge and dumped it out the door, but just someone to, like, listen and be able to pinpoint, like, this is your biggest pain point. We need to start here, whether it's cortisol or muscle or energy or testosterone, whatever it is. And then we're going to move you through the rest of this plan. That's the only way. One of the big criticisms of our field is that there's just a lot to do and there's so much and there's overwhelming. I think that only happens when you're not able, when you're in a relationship with a provider where you can't focus and kind of get, we call it the core concept, right? Like get to that like main idea and then build off that main idea and keep creating a journey. So I think men need that honestly just as much as women. So there's so much more I'd love to talk to you about. Like we've gone past our time, which but this has been an amazing conversation and I really hope it helps anyone listening and I hope for any woman out there, you send it to a man in your life because I think taking ownership of your health and being on the front end of it, the earlier the better. We're in an environment that's asking us to be more proactive with our health, period. Dr. Smith, I know that you've got a fitness background, you've got the integrative background, you've been seeing patients in our clinics at Whole Plus. What is the one thing that you're the most excited about when it comes to our field, and you're thinking about men's health? What are you really excited about as you look forward?
I mean, I think just our practice, I think the makings of a good doctor, and I think you see this just through medical training, is like, a good doctor asks the right questions.
Yeah.
am fortunate in the sense that, our visits aren't just 8 minutes. I get more time to ask more questions. So, yeah, maybe I'm not the best doctor, but at the end of the day, I get to ask more questions to be able to connect and find those right pieces of information to link together to actually move people in the right direction in line with their goals. We talked about this, talking about the evidence-based medicine
Yeah.
of patient
Yeah.
preference, the knowledge that's coming from data research, and then our personal experience in practicing, putting it all together. I don't think you get that just from like an 8-minute visit.
No.
Or if you do, it's exceptionally, exceptionally difficult to do that, in the role of the doctor to kind of make the right question, get to the right answer and fit it in with the patient's values, to move them in the right direction. So I don't know. I'm just excited working with patients, no matter what the problem is that they're coming up with creative solutions. I feel like, there's the cut and dry conventional where, there's an algorithm and this is
Right.
the right
Check.
direction and the
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
direction and this is,
Yeah.
and it's almost never that, when patients come with us, we're in this, fun space of actually talking about diet, sleep, stress, and exercise and whether they want to do intermittent fasting or picking another style of diet to work on moving them toward their goal, like, having that conversation with them and figure out, okay, this is the parameters for if that fits with your lifestyle, perfect. Because this is a,
I
future
love
employment.
that you answered with, like, the practice of medicine and the relationship, not with, like, "Oh my gosh, let me tell you all the
Yeah,
biohacking tools that are coming up in the future." I love
no,
that.
I
Well,
think
okay, go
I
ahead.
think people that knew me, would think, okay, I was, into the biohacking space when that was, very trendy back when I was, in college and
Yeah.
early in grad school. And it's been around, but these like tried true principles of diet, sleep, stress, and exercise aren't going away, no
No.
matter whatever the latest
No.
fad is. So it needs to be sustainable, whatever plan we come up with someone for.
Amazing. Final question.
Okay.
What makes you whole?
Mm. I mean, I think my brain turns to fishing a lot is my hobby. I'm probably gonna go fishing after this. So it's my time
Amazing.
outside in nature and kind of my crafting indoor hobby when it's not nice outside to be there. So just being outside in nature is always a good way to make myself whole.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me on this show and for everybody else watching and listening. Dr. Smith does practice with us at Whole Plus. And remember, men's health needs attention in a different way than the conventional algorithms. So please share this with the men that you love. And remember, we post new episodes every week. We'll see you guys next time.
Before you go, remember healing doesn't happen all at once, it happens in moments. If today's episode gave you one of those moments, subscribe and keep learning with me. The next video is right here and it picks up right where this one left off.